Welcome to Deckham Law and Disorder.
The views expressed on this podcast are Peter Deckham's opinions based on his legal experience, research, and academic work. The podcast does not offer legal advice. For any legal matters, always consult an independent attorney who can assess your specific situation. And now, on with the show.
Hi, Peter Deckham again, and today, after I tell you a little bit more about myself, we're going to dive into artificial intelligence, and not what some people believe when they say, I have AI. It's awesome intelligence. No, that's not what we're talking about. I'm also not going to give you too much technical stuff, because I'm not the one person to qualify to do that. I'm more interested in the political realities of AI and the battles that are being fought and who the winners and losers are. And that's basically a journey that I think is worth taking. People want to know a little bit about the weirdness that I am. I am an Euromut. I have, as I pointed out earlier, a Roman Catholic turned atheist father who divorced my mom before I was born and knew what was coming. My mom emigrated from Bulgaria to the United States, so I have Slavic background. And I'm 20% Ashkenazi, which is my great-grandmother was Jewish. So I have the right to insult and take down just about any white person on the planet. When I step into other kinds of cultures, maybe not so much. One little vignette that I will say, when I was an active altar boy in the British equivalent of the Episcopal faith, we were living in Beirut, Lebanon. There was an Anglican church there, and I became the altar boy for that church. There were two of us, and I remember during one service, I was getting very nauseous. So I mumbled to the padre, I think I'm getting a little nauseous. I think I'm going to throw up. And he mumbled back to me. Meanwhile, the congregation is back there. They don't hear any of this stuff. He says, well, put your head between your legs and make it look religious. So I followed the order. My head sailed down. I stayed down there a few seconds, and I popped up and I said, it didn't work. What do I do now? He said, you're going to stand up. You're going to walk out of the church, turn around and go back, cross yourself, and go down as if you know what you're doing and you're going to do something specific. So I did precisely that. I walked out the back of, down the aisle, blessing myself, putting my hands together in a very religious way, stepped outside, went to the ocean. We were by the ocean. And I let loose into the Mediterranean and sort of gathered my thoughts. And I said, I'm okay. So I turned around and I repeated the procedure, blessing myself, my hands clasped very much in front of me. I think everybody in that congregation thought I was doing something that was part of the religious process. I went back, knelt down, we finished the service, and nobody except those up us on the altar area had any clue that Peter Deckham almost barfed. All right, let's go to another subject that might make people barf, and that is artificial intelligence. One of the interesting things about analyzing new stuff in our culture is to look at the political and financial world behind it. Who are the winners likely to be? Who are the losers likely to be? And I'll just sort of remind everybody, if you don't know this already, when motor vehicles, automobiles, first came to the United States, and primarily being introduced mostly in the early part of the 20th century, there are a lot of towns that wouldn't let cars into the town because the backfiring of an engine scared the horses. Last time I looked, there are not a whole lot of horses in towns anymore. Sure, we have a few, Amish, et cetera, around the world, but we now live in an automotive age. We have superhighways, thank you, Highway Defense Act of 1957. And all I can tell people who tell you, we got to contain it, we've got to stop it, it's not going to work. The most you're going to get when you're trying to deal with a new technology that you truly despise and feel threatened by is you may delay it. You may try to create some guidelines around it, and you will find the people who have the most money to gain in the structure are going to do everything in their power to make sure that you don't put any guardrails around them at all. And let's add to that the people who are making the guideline rules, otherwise known as Congress, mostly don't have a clue what artificial intelligence is. They don't know a bit from a byte, from a petaflop to, they don't know anything. And they pretend to know stuff. But they're the ones who are going to have to make the rules and laws. There may be some regulatory agencies, but as we're watching now, regulatory agencies are being hemmed in by the Supreme Court that's telling the regulatory agencies, hey, agencies, courts know more than you do, even if the guy dropped out of kindergarten. Huh? You PhDs and experts in technology, there's a guy who basically went to law school, graduated bottom of his class, but somehow got appointed to the federal bench. I wonder how that happened. These are the people who are going to make the guidelines and determine what's happening, who are working in the federal agencies. Look at how many federal agencies have been disemboweled of late. Everyone may think that's really good, but when you really think about what happens when federal agencies lose power, sometimes it's good. Sometimes they've been overreaching. Sometimes it's too much. But sometimes they're the only barrier between a harsh reality and a livable reality. And the people who are in those agencies are experts. And we have people who hate experts. If you don't like an expert, you call that person woke or an out-of-touch elite or someone just doesn't understand what we as ordinary Americans experience. On the other hand, if you want to have surgery, I recommend you go to an expert. You know, maybe you don't like that, but in my world, I am very, very much, I like when I have medical care, I kind of want to trust the doctor. I kind of look them up. I want to know what they've done, etc. So here we are, we're dealing with a new technology that to me is the greatest change potential that we have faced since, I even say the internet is not as important as artificial intelligence. I would say since we had nuclear weapons and we've had a whole lot of countries doing mutually assured destruction as a mechanism for peace. And now we have some very interesting technology changes. Let's start with processing power of computers to understand what they can do. Supercomputers, whether they're in an array or an individual computer, process at something called a petaflop. A petaflop is equal to approximately 1,000 million calculations per second. That's a lot. And you look at petaflop capable computers, the supercomputers, they're at the 20 to 30 plus range of petaflops. So multiply the thing that I just said, which is a quadrillion, times 20 or 30. And you know what? Those guys are slow. I'll say it again. Those computers are slow because right now, people are working on computers, plasma-based computers, which unfortunately for those who have them, they are kept in a chamber with minus 400 degrees, temperature, and they can be no vibrations, and they don't work on the binary system. As you know, when you're using your internet or using Word or any other process, all you're dealing with X's and O's, 0 and 1, 0 and 1. Every numerical expression is a 0 or 1. And as a result, to say an ordinary number can take up a whole lot of computer space. The new system works on qubits. Qubits, which can process very complicated transactions at the same time, that are tens of thousands, if not millions of times faster than the fastest computers we have today. Now you combine artificial intelligence with a plasma-based, fully functional computer. The first country in the world that is able to combine those technologies can probably invade every blockchain, every security system, every military encryption, anywhere on the planet, because it can do 1 million times more calculations until it randomly penetrates the security system that's designed to stop it. So let's say People's Republic of China gets plasma computing qubit calculations and uses artificial intelligence, which by that time is going to be really ridiculous, and decides to penetrate the entire American military system. First player to get that gets to do that. And the first player to do that may be successful in blocking and turning off all the other computers trying to get in. So you kind of understand why there's a little panic attack among the countries that are dealing with artificial intelligence, and why we're worried about people getting the technologies. And I actually have as much fear for plasma computing as I do for artificial intelligence. But when you combine the two, that's more power than anyone has ever had. And for those individuals in my industry, the motion picture and television and digital media world, who think, well, you know what? AI is never going to substitute for creativity. Maybe not. Humans bring things into creativity that are a product of their fears, their dreams, their hopes, and their upbringing. But you could raise a computer, a human equivalent. You could turn him into a murderer. You could turn him into a high priest. You could also raise him as if you have every single capacity that a human being has, except they don't lose it. They don't forget stuff. I find forgetting stuff to be particularly useful in my lifetime. I wish I could erase entire sections of it. All that notwithstanding, you can, in fact, give that computer a complete cultural education from ground zero and say, write me a book about da, and it'll do it. We right now don't have a computer system, AI system, that can replicate the excellence of a human experience. But it's a matter of time. At that point, different people are going to be telling different stories. So now you know about this ridiculous new computing system, plasma computing, and you now want to take a good hard look at artificial intelligence. I don't use it much because I actually love to write, but if I have a bunch of documents that I want to get summaries and I don't have to go through it, AI does a pretty good job of summarizing documents. I don't want them to take the writing away from me because I love to write. I love public speaking. I love doing research. Oh yes, AI can help you find things faster. And even if you don't think AI is doing the research, when you go on and ask Google or Pilot or whatever, you ask a question and you get an answer, it's AI, basically looking at the universe and bringing back the information to you, maybe with a little bias. And sometimes it's too honest. We recently had a case where ChatGPT, basically a suicide depressed teen, asked Chat, can you tell me the best rope ties for nooses? And Chat just went back and gave him the right noose thing. And the kid killed himself almost immediately. Parents are suing and saying, you are responsible. You are letting kids or people find mechanisms to destroy themselves. We're going to see a lot more of that. But as you're looking at the battle between the AI purveyors and creators of AI and everybody else, let's do something that I find very useful in analyzing the future. Let's follow the money. And then let's follow how the money has been deployed to generate political power to enhance those. So hence, the people with the most money in our country tend to be able to buy the most political power they can. We have today several trillion-dollar valued corporations. And we have people investing over time what are effectively billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars to develop the technology. People who have the money and who are the attractive recipients of more money tend to win. So let's take a look at a little excerpt from one of my favorite writers from the LA Times, Michael Hiltzik. The artificial intelligence camp loves big numbers. The sum raised by OpenAI in its latest funding round, $40 billion. Expected investment on AI by Meta, Amazon, Alphabet, and Microsoft this year, $320 billion. The market value of NVIDIA Corporation, a supplier of chips for AI firms, $4.2 trillion. Oh my God, what's going on? Who can fight that? if that money is deployed, and you'll notice there's something called the Silicon Valley Tech Bros. The tech bros in the Silicon Valley are doing everything in their power to make sure nothing impinges on their total ability to access content, whether it's copyrighted or not copyrighted. We know that the Copyright Office has actually said if something's created by AI, it has no copyright protection. But things that are created by a human being are subject to copyright. So here I am, I'm a writer, I've written a page, I hand it to the computer, however I hand it to them, and tell them to write me a script. What percentage of the result is me? And what percentage of that result is AI? And how do I tell the Copyright Office accurately which is which? And how does the Copyright Office go about figuring it out? And what if somebody lies and develops something by AI, comes to me and tells me the story, which they had nothing to do to create, and I buy that from them as if it were, original work subject to copyright, and then I make the movie or the production based upon it, what happens? And why won't the Copyright Office recognize AI in some sort of proprietary protection mode? Why isn't there isn't regular copyright, 75, 95 years, whatever it is, why can't there be a shorter copyright? Or why can't we deal with something like protecting property? But right now what you're getting is the people who own the AI systems want as much input. They want to do something to create large language models, which I used to think was a tax degree, but it is an LLM. They want to get as much, information as they can and feed it into their system so the computer has everything in it that it wants. By the way, when you use AI on your home computer or on your cell phone, let me make something really clear. You ain't got no AI on your computer or on your cell phone. What you're doing is accessing giant systems that have this massive memory capacity. And if you want to know what that massive memory capacity looks, take a good hard look at things like, for example, Microsoft, where it's putting its file servers. Those are like mini computers. It's like memory. So they have banks and banks and banks and banks and banks and banks and banks. I could keep going, but we'll go banks to the 50th power. And they're in these giant warehouses that suck electricity out of the earth like nothing. And electrical demand is just exploding. And when you see these lovely, gentle, loving, caring warehouse structures that are as big as some of the biggest office flattened out towers in the world, and you realize that's where all that data is being stored and memorized. And they want to be able to get more of it. And they don't want to pay for it. And if you're a copyright owner, you say, whoa, wait a minute. We are seeing something going on that sort of looks like what happened in the music business with all kinds of rights, performing rights societies, digital societies. We're watching some of the biggest computer companies that are basically running AI, making generic deals with groups of owners of content where there is a royalty that is paid so that that company, no matter what happens in the future, will generate some revenues from the use of generative AI when it goes into these LLM, large language models. I suspect we're going to see a lot more of that, and I think it's going to happen. But let's go back to this battle. On the one hand, we have legacy companies. Let's call them networks, media, studios, music recording facilities, musicians, actors, writers, directors, all these people. And they don't have a lot of money. As a matter of fact, their industries are facing some real problems. You may not know this, but the video game industry by itself is larger than the rest of the classical entertainment business combined. So you're now looking at this value proposition and you're saying, okay, I created this stuff. There is copyright law. I should be proud. I do stuff better than any AI. I think that's why people, when they're upset with AI, go, I. But nevertheless, the reality here is there's a battle. So I'm going to ask you a question. How do you think multi-billion-dollar corporations with old world business models are going to fare in battles in politics against mega trillion-dollar companies that are the only places anybody's really putting serious money. Who do you think wins, trillionaires or billionaires? Sounds like a stupid question, but it's very real. And when you start looking at the stuff behind all this, the political realities of who wins and who loses, you'll notice that the President of the United States has staked out a very clear priority. His excuse, fear of China. Justified? Of course it's justified. But there's a balancing act going on here. You have many constituencies. It's not just the military that needs to be served, but the people who make a living by creating stuff. But they're coming up short. They don't matter because the trillionaires, the Silicon Valley, is putting together PACs and super PACs that are basically aligning not with liberal forces in the world, but they're backing conservative forces. And by that, I mean populist conservative. They are basically the MAGA favorite. They're backing Trump. Trump is favoring Bitcoin. We notice there's a little bit of, I'm making a few bucks, but that's the way it goes. All I'm telling you is that we're watching these behemoths battling it out. But Silicon Valley has absolutely no compunction about using its power to squelch the lousy billionaires, media, creative people, because they don't matter. They're not the value creators. And that pisses off my clients like nobody's business. And if you look at the Screen Actors Guild, AFTRA, or you look at the Writers Guild, Directors Guild, etc., and you look at their recent massive strike, and you look at the results, they were going to contain, stop, limit AI so that, okay, we are going to protect writers. You can't just use that without identifying it. And you have to pay Writers Guild minimum anyway, so there's no benefit and you're screwing the writers. Actors Guild is saying, we don't want you to be able to create, fake images of actors. We're going to stop you from doing that. Meanwhile, I don't think there's anybody out there in the I've got a screen in front of me universe who hasn't seen a lot of deep fakes. And they're getting better. It is very difficult for a layperson, and it's also becoming increasingly difficult for some experts to be able to separate a deep fake from the reality. You can get the same intonation unless you're doing a human being. You can get their voice. You can get their way they present and talk, not just the timbre of the voice, but the rhythm and pace of the voice. You can get their facial expressions. You can digitize all that stuff, and you can create entire scenarios where that individual is speaking and saying things that individual absolutely hates and despises, and it looks real. And that issue of deep fakes goes back to something that at the inception of my presentation of this podcast really, really is a difficult democracy killer. Because if you don't trust what you see, if you don't know how to differentiate between the real and the unreal, you have a tendency to outsource your decision-making to somebody else. And that proclivity to say, I don't get it, it's too hard, I'm just going to trust somebody that I trust, and we'll let them run with it. That is one of the most dangerous threats to democracy on this planet. The outsourcing of opinion because you don't understand it. People need to do a little bit of drilling, a little homework. You don't need to be an expert, but you do need to understand the groundings and the underpinnings of what we're talking about, because it's going to affect your life. It may take your job away. And you look at all the people screaming about socialism and all that stuff. I find that fascinating because it's a generational thing. Those of us who were raised with duck and cover and the red menace and the domino theory and all that stuff, you say communism or socialism, we want to kill you. On the other hand, kids born after the Vietnam War, and that's most kids, because if they're born after the Vietnam War, they're adults. And the reality is they don't understand the Red Scare. They didn't have to do duck and cover. The nuclear bomb and mutually assured destruction did not occur during their youth. It did in mine when I was in elementary school. You dive under the desk. We thought that would help. I guess we didn't look at the footage out of Hiroshima and Nagasaki because it would not help. Nevertheless, we grew up basically in morbid fear. The domino theory said that if one nation was turned communist, all the nations around it would eventually fall like dominoes and become dominated by communism, and we hated it. Well, of course, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, communism took a big fall with the collapse of the Soviet Union. We thought that would solve everything. It didn't. In fact, the same people who destroyed the Soviet system rose in new formats and new incarnations. I won't mention Vladimir Putin by name. Oops, it slipped out. And he's as bad as Joseph Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev, bang your shoe on. You don't understand this. There was a banging the shoe moment. And there you go. But what is it about socialism that is different? Socialism, first of all, most people don't even understand what it is. Artificial intelligence is basically telling you, I'm going to take your job. I'm going to take your job, white collar person. I'm going to take your job if you manufacture stuff, robot. You're going to go. Huh? Well, what happens if people spend fortunes to educate their children in college and they can't get a job? Well, that's not good for the rich people either, because who's going to buy their products? There are not enough rich people to live completely isolated without selling and providing services to everybody else. So what's a system that would accommodate that? Well, you're looking at the government taking over ownership and control of some of these biggest companies and basically providing universal basic income to everybody else. Healthcare, most of that will still have a very strong human component. But as somebody who's had a robot, I know her name is Rosa, install a new knee in my body, I kind of appreciate that robots are doing a lot more than people think they can do. Capacity, it's only growing. And when you talk about bringing manufacturing back to the United States, AI has already cleared that one. How many assembly lines of automobiles or sophisticated, appliances are being done by human beings? Look at the robots. They're building the cars. So we bring manufacturing back to the United States, and the companies that own the robots are making the money. They don't have to pay as many people. They have a few maintenance workers, but they're all working on having maintenance robots. So you go with that one. So you look at socialism. Is that inevitable? Does that have to happen? Even if we hate the idea? Because there's no way to make money in a society where every viable form of value creation, or most value creation, is being determined by robots. And the people who own the robots, those are the trillionaires I mentioned a while ago. They're the ones who are going to make the big bucks. And they got nothing to lose by firing you. They just got to find a way for you to be able to spend enough money to make their riches stay. And so as we look at things like Donald Trump investing, getting 10% of, Intel, and you start looking at these changes across the board, you start saying, well, what's that going to mean for me? And the answer is that the people with money win and the people without money lose. And I'm sure that's a story you've never heard before. But when it comes to AI, no matter what you do to improve yourself, there's nothing that you can do to improve your abilities to make money. No education, no internship, no apprenticeship, nothing. What do you do? And people don't think that far ahead, but at some point, is socialism inevitable? And is Donald Trump creating corporate socialism by buying pieces of a company? Let's talk about what is socialism. It's very important in the world of AI. Socialism is where the government owns and controls the wealth and manufacturing and productivity and land of a country. It's not about, Medicare. It's a social program. Just because it has the word social in it doesn't make it socialism. Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid are not socialism. Public education is not socialism. Socialism is socialism. The government owns stuff. But if you have a class of citizens, oligarchs, who own and control all the technology, is that a de facto oligarchy form of government, basically requiring socialism for everybody else? And remember, these people who own these massive, massive systems have put trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars into them. And the money that comes back to them gives them power. They can buy the president. They can buy the Congress. They don't need the president. They don't need the Congress. But let's look at some other realities. Everybody who's investing in our lovely, lovely AI technology, they are sure that money is going to bring back a lot more money to them. When you have a $4.2 million valuation, NVIDIA, how do you make more money? And why do you care? The answer is because that's what corporate structures are all about. They're about generating positive results for shareholders. Now, if the government becomes the shareholders and the people become the shareholders, that's called socialism. So what are they facing? Are they 100% sure that all this money is going to generate all kinds of rates of return and make them even richer? Did we remember something about the internet bubble around 2000? For those of you who were around at that time, you may not know about it. You may have read about it. But everybody was swearing that anything that was internet related, oh my God, you got to put your money in it. It's going to make a fortune. It was called, people were creating little companies, startups out of garages, and went from nothing to Facebook. Meta. Amazon will also start in a garage. It exploded. All these things were based on the internet. If you don't have any internet, none of that other stuff would have ever worked. So we exploded in new companies and new values, and old companies like Ford Motor Company, Kodak, etc. Movie theaters, motion picture studios, they started walking down and losing money. Well, if you think that all these internet trillionaires can't lose, I will predict that probably 80% of the money, this is just a number I'm making up out of the top of my head, that 80% of the money invested in AI is a waste. It just can't all create massive value. As a matter of fact, a lot of the participants in AI are competing with each other. So if one of them wins big, someone else kind of loses big. So that's the first reality. And that is a scary reality for people who are investing in it. And I can promise you, there are going to be some huge failures that are going to kind of look a little bit like the Bitcoin disasters, the cryptocurrency disasters that we've seen in the last couple of years. Companies making tons and tons of money, although once the government starts embedding the currency, all of a sudden those values have a different protection that they didn't have before. So the government can take stuff that is pure crap, and by adding a few, magical touches and legitimizing it, take the crap and turn it into veritable gold. There's another reality when you're dealing with technology. Almost every time you buy a piece of equipment, a car, whatever it is, as you leave the showroom, as you take the technology home, by the time you hit home, it's obsolete. Changes are so quick. I'll give you an example. It's called singularity theory. I'm going to use some numbers from the past because the author who did this, Ray Kurzweil, came up with it. If you take the year 2000, everything that is in that year as change, whatever change in that 1 year, a century later, the amount of change we will experience will be 20,000 times the change in that 1 year. That's called singularity theory, and actually I think the numbers are a little conservative. I think those numbers are going to be much, much, much bigger. But what happens is some new technology, and I mentioned plasma computing a while ago, some new technology is going to step in, and it's going to take all the values created on all those wonderful AI companies, and in an instant, that new technology is going to blow values out the door. And I don't think this happens just once. I think this is a sequence of bubbles, some bigger than others. But the reality is you can't have a stock market or valuation system that only goes up. I mean, just think of what happens if the Chinese, who are very good at industrial espionage, are able to leapfrog something that we can't do. As a matter of fact, right now, the Chinese are developing an AI-developed military platform, which think of it as an aircraft carrier in outer space, which carries massive targeting torpedoes, rockets. As it circles the Earth, it can take out any place in the world in a matter of minutes, especially if you have several of these aircraft satellites floating out of there. And they can fire these torpedoes, rockets, whatever, heavily targeted, guided by AI to predetermined targets anywhere. And they're going so fast, there's no current technology that can stop them. And the Chinese are working on it like crazy. We have nothing compared to that. So AI is going to throw a lot of monkey wrenches into a whole lot of dreams, a whole lot of companies. And we're going to have to watch that hit. But what happens to the world around those AI companies? What happens when American companies lose? And I understand why, basically fighting against China, trying to get the moon on purpose earlier than they do. We're targeting 2027, and I'm the Easter Bunny if we get there. But we'd be lucky to get there by 2030. All these technologies have two components. One is a value component, and the other one's a survival component. Government is supposed to be there for survival, but take a look at who's running our military. You got a major who doesn't believe women should vote as the head of the Department of Defense. Do we want to trust this technology growth to someone who doesn't get it? And you have to ask questions. This is where good quality leadership is absolutely essential. And that's why we can't lock in a monotone form of political vision. If things change, we need to change leadership to adapt to that change. If we have the same old monotone vision, I'm right and only I can fix it, and something big that comes up that they can't fix, which appears to be things going on with the Federal Reserve right now, we get stuck with the damage. And if we don't have a political system that can elect other people, maybe more from the same party, maybe people from other parties, but who have different perspectives, we get screwed. And we could easily say, you know what? People can't govern anymore. We're too crazy. Let's just let AI substitute. I mean, what could be better than an AI judge in a court where AI is completely neutral because it was programmed that way? Wait a minute, it was programmed? You mean somebody put some things in there that maybe added a bias that the computer doesn't know how to recognize a bias from a hole in the ground? There's some really terrible questions that we have to ask. And if there's anything that we have to worry about more than anything else with artificial intelligence, it's who defines the guardrails. And right now, those trillionaires are doing everything in their power to make sure that those guidelines don't exist. That means you will have a government that you don't trust, run by a technology you trust even less, by people who are absolutely making decisions that have nothing to do with your best interests at heart. If that's what you want, that's what we're headed. And if we care about that, if we want to limit the destructive power of AI and the survival of our own system versus other AI systems, then we need to make sure we have a political structure that allows us to adapt, enough flexibility to deal with it, and one where we, the people, the human beings on this planet, are able to make choices that at the time, remember, time changes everything, at the time are the best choices we can make. If we have the same choice and it perpetuates, we're screwed. So we need that flexibility simply to survive, to keep our jobs going, and everything else that goes with it. It's a very important consideration. We need flexibility. We need intelligence. We need to stop defunding our universities, et cetera, because if they're elite, fine, deal with the elitism, but stop cutting the research. We can't compete with the rest of the world that isn't driven by these dogmatic underpinnings. They don't care. I mean, China and Russia, well, Russia's involved in a war that's screwing itself, but China is looking at all this stuff. They're looking at our political system, and they're laughing. I don't like being laughed at as an American. I believe the United States is capable of continued greatness. But we've got to stop acting like idiots and start beginning to believe in ourselves and each other and to trust and to build systems that have checks and balances. It's the checks and balances, by the way, that made America great. If we want to make America great again, we need to amplify those checks and balances, those guardrails, and make them work. That was the one great creation our fathers brought into our country that made it work better than anything we'd ever seen, the world had ever seen. Someone once said, democracy is a terrible system of government, but it's better than anything else out there. I think that guy was named Winston Churchill. I don't know. When you look at all the things that we're facing, it's complicated. Be very careful to whom you are outsourcing your vote and your opinion. Be very careful when people tell you and offer you simple explanations that, you know what? There's nothing simple anymore. Be very careful when people tell you anecdotal evidence of things that they want to have done, but don't have the statistical backing of it. Without statistic aggregation of facts, one fact here or there, I can find a fact that supports anything. Be wary of anecdotal evidence. Someone once said, you know why we don't seem to find intelligent life in the universe? Someone responded, yeah, because they all had artificial intelligence and killed off all the beings on those planets. That's funny, except it's not. So that's the program for today. Stuff that I'm looking at and blogging about and interested in involve all kinds of interesting scientific observations and political systems. Like, for example, what's going on with the Federal Reserve? What could that do if we took the independence of the Federal Reserve, created the cut in interest rates the president wants at the sacrifice of the independence of the Federal Reserve? That's something that's going to affect everyone. And you need to know what it is, and everybody's talking about it. And it's kind of complicated to explain, but I'm going to take a shot at it. We'll take a look at microplastics. We'll take a look at climate change. We'll take a look at water shortages. We'll take a look at the gerrymandering issue that's totally making people crazy. I'm already crazy. You probably already determined that. But I would like to be able to explore those. And I've been doing a lot of blogging and research in these areas. So I hope you stick with me and we follow ourselves through this. The goal is to create a common reality and create a basis for us to trust us and our government. And that's it. We'll see you next time.
If you would like to give feedback, suggestions for new topics, or have a question that might be selected for a future podcast, please email us at decumpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.